a very bad disease did emerge from Wuhan. But we, as I've said many times in the last few weeks, we as Western democracies have lived through far worse epidemics, cholera, smallpox, polio, HIV, typhus, without suppressing essential freedoms and becoming North Korea or China, which is really what has happened, in effect.
Jeff Peel, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Naomi Wolf. Naomi, you're extremely welcome. Tell me, first of all, a little bit about Daily Clout, your new initiative, and what that's all about. And also for viewers and listeners in the United Kingdom, a little bit more about your background and your interest in your direction of travel politically.
Sure. So it's a pleasure to be speaking with you, especially because, my husband and I have really fond memories of Belfast in Northern Ireland, and we can't wait to get back. So it's lovely to be speaking to you.
It's a bit quiet these days, Naomi. It's very quiet. Everything is locked down, and we don't have any roadmap for getting out of this tyranny quite yet.
It's appalling to hear. I mean, one of the things that I've been tweeting about is how lockdowns are distorting and perverting culture's kind of organic inclination, and to think of sociable, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, unable to socialize, unable to, move freely, to assemble, to engage in freely accessible cultural events is so contrary to my experience of both nations. But I'm the co-founder of Daily Clout. It is a democracy boosting site, which means that you can access and socially share any state or federal US piece of legislation and take action on it. So anyone can be a lobbyist, anyone can change laws, which is really exciting. But we also plan to expand globally. So let your VC friends know. We want to create a Daily Clout Britain, a Daily Clout Republic of Ireland, a Daily Clout India, Israel, and so on around the world, because there are 132 democracies around the world. But as you see, it's a very easy thing to suppress a democracy when the people don't understand or have access to their laws, their legislative processes, how to mobilize, how to fight tyranny. In addition to that, I've also written 8 New York Times and international bestsellers. The one that is probably most relevant to our conversation is The End of America, which I wrote in 2008, sadly prescient, predicting everything you're seeing now. I mean, honestly, what's going on now is beyond my furthest prediction, but it basically made the case that there are always 10 steps to fascism or totalitarianism, whether a leader is on the left or the right. He or she always takes these 10 steps, and inevitably there reaches a point in a closing democracy when you reach step 10 if populations don't realize in time what's happening and stand up to oppose it. And so I've updated The End of America with a new introduction to address the fact that we are now at step 10. So that's a bit of background.
What was it though? I must admit, I was obviously incredibly naive. I just assumed that governments would just carry on doing relatively little and not interfering in our lives too much. But you tweeted earlier that you'd had a conversation back in the Hay Festival in 2019, and you'd mentioned to some people that you suspected that there was every chance that the United Kingdom was about to go through an authoritarianism coup. What gave rise to that sort of suspicion that such a thing could happen?
Well, again, it's not a suspicion, unfortunately. So it is true. It was more than a conversation. It was more than a few people, just to kind of describe the kind of magnitude of that moment. It was 600 British people from, presumably from everywhere in the United Kingdom, gathered at the Hay Festival in an auditorium. It was myself and Matt D'Ancona, and I was talking about my new book, Outrages, which was just coming out, which also, interestingly, has a chapter about how the British state in the 19th century innovated the suppression of populations by exploiting infectious diseases epidemics like typhoid and cholera, and how that gave the British state justification to crack down on traditional British liberties. So that book has been under relentless attack since its publication. But anyway, at that event, I clearly warned everybody, they were heading into Brexit. they were leaving the protections of human rights law in the European Union, which is robust. There are strong human rights protections, all of which are being violated, by French and German and Greek lockdowns. But leaving that aside, leaving the protections of Europe meant that Britain was going to rely on, centuries of precedent and centuries of case law, but it has no written constitution. And without a written constitution, what you're seeing is absolutely possible. I'd also, not to get really nerdy, but this is important, I had tried to research building a British bill camp, which is the legislative database that we built for Daily Clout for the United States. And what I found is that the actual British law is very inaccessible to ordinary people. It's the user interface for legislation.gov.uk is very poor. You have to know the name of a bill or a statute in order to search it. You can't search by subject. You are in tech. You understand how serious this is.
It's impenetrable, frankly, isn't it?
Thank you. Indeed. And then when you even go to Parliament's website and you try to follow the links to where are the laws, that they claim are digitized, you see that it's versions that are not up to date. They say that in writing. And you and I know that anything can be done to a bill if it's not the final draft. And they also say ridiculous things that I, as CEO of a tech company involving government legislative data, know are ridiculous. Like, these laws are tied up in fragile parchments, at the bottom, or, inaccessible in legal offices. You have to be a lawyer to see them. It's nonsense. So all of this means that without a clear written constitution, democracies around the world have written constitutions based on the American model. It's not rocket science. They're short documents, but they basically say if you're a British citizen, you have the right to freedom of assembly. You have the right to freedom of speech. You have the right to, refuse to be experimented on without your consent. And you all don't have that. And there's one more thing. So yes, what we're seeing now is absolutely predictable. And I've been warning, I don't mean to be an annoying Cassandra, and it's horrible to be told, I told you so, but I've literally loving Britain and having loved ones and friends in Britain. I've been trying to warn everyone since right after the lockdowns began, right after I read the Coronavirus Act, that this would happen, because nothing prevents it. And also, the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop my peroration, as a former political consultant at the highest levels of US government, this is human nature. When, autocrats will autocrat if they're given the opportunity. It's not a left, it's not a right. If there's nothing preventing a government or a cabal, from seizing power and suppressing freedoms, they will do so. And so this was absolutely predictable.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we always assumed that our governments were looking after the best interests of the citizenship, and therefore the Coronavirus Act has been as big a surprise to me and others who, the words that the United Kingdom was one of the greatest liberal democracies in the world fell easily off our lips. And it's been as big a shock to me as it has been to anybody on the left and right, really, that this has happened. And I think it's a topic of conversation that we're all having.
I'm glad
what is the reason for this? What is the reason for the malevolence that you sort of hinted at there, that if given the opportunity, that authoritarianism could take hold? What is the impetus behind it? Is it there's been a lot of discussion about the emergence of a new elite group, the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates is mentioned frequently, Is it that government has been swallowed up by corporatism? Is that the reason why this has happened? What's the origin of the malevolence?
Right. Well, you're asking.
Because I don't think it's a virus, is it?
No, it's not a virus. It's not a virus. Virus is I would never say that a very bad disease was not, did not emerge from Wuhan. A very bad disease did emerge from Wuhan, but we, as I've said many times in the last few weeks, we as Western democracies have lived through far worse epidemics cholera, smallpox, polio, HIV, typhus without suppressing essential freedoms and becoming North Korea or China, which is really what has happened, you know, in effect. What is behind it? Well, let me go backwards and speak to one of the things you just said, and then I'll answer that question the best I can. You said that everyone, and I understand it because we've had 40 or 50 post-war years of solid liberty, right? And human rights in America, in Britain, in France, in Italy, Germany, and so on. But that is not the norm. You know, that's the exception. And it's even the exception in Britain. And, you know, I've been under ceaseless reputational attack from the British establishment for pointing this out starting in May of 2019, because you don't have to be a fantasist or a conspiracy theorist, which is a phrase I really hate, to like the dream that, you know, government is always going to be benign is an illusion that any student of history in Western democracies should snap out of, you know,
Yeah, but
right away.
we assumed that Boris Johnson was a kind of bumbling old idiot and libertarian. You know, we didn't assume that when we elected him, he would turn into a tyrant. You know, you know, he seemed to be more interested in quoting Latin prose than he had in sort of imposing the wishes of the Trilateral Commission. You know, it just seems unlikely that all of this liberty that he you know, espoused and championed should be thrown out so summarily.
Right. Well, how do you get elected to suppress liberty unless you espouse support for liberty? I mean, I hear you, but let me ask you, Jeffrey, you worked with these people, you know them better than I do. What do you think?
I think that's part of the problem. You know, we do have, and because of, I take your point about the use of the word conspiracy theory. And of course, many of them have come, ironically, it's probably conspiracy theories are more valid these days than the word of the government. You know, we have had systemic misinformation peddling by the government. The government in the United Kingdom is now the biggest advertiser by far, peddling their propaganda every which way. And of course, the BBC is just parroting all of the government lines that come out of their comms offices. But I'm still at a loss to understand what it is, what the origin is of the tyranny. Why is it that they're doing this? You know, what is the end game here? Is it simply the suppression of the people in order to line their own pockets, or is I don't know. And I'm not confident with any answer. I'm not confident with the answers coming from the left or the right.
Right. I mean, I'll give you my best answer to that to date, mindful that every day fills in detail. Okay. So let me start just with an anecdote, if I may. People can't imagine that. I mean, people are really looking in the wrong direction. It's very hard for people to imagine, you know, a global directionality that has such evil outcomes and effects. But I hang out with some of these people, and they're, you know, they're in my social circle, and some of them are probably in your social circle, and you and I both know, but it's something that really needs to be explained to everyone, that you can have really nice people thinking they're not engaged in a tyrannical domination of the planet. And let me just give you one example. I'm friends with, I'm not going to name him, but a guy who manages the stock portfolio basically of some of the biggest totalitarian countries in the world who are not our friends. And he's in that kind of, you know, Davos, you know, CFR kind of circle of elites. And I mean, I know a number of these people. They're friends of mine, right? They're perfectly lovely, as you know. They are lovely at a dinner party. They don't mean any harm. But we were talking about Greece in the crisis a few years ago, when Greek people were protesting because the World Bank, I believe, was saying they had to adopt austerity measures. And he was very much in favor of these globalist policies. Of course, they're really good for his clients. They're really good if you want to, you know, legally do insider investing in the stock market. It's really convenient if you're at the top of the capitalist pyramid to take away choice and autonomy from the peoples of democracies, because that is always a wild card. You don't know which way they're going to go. You can't control the outcome. So you can't guarantee billions in revenue for your clients. So he was basically saying, look, these people are so ridiculous. He was so upset that they were, advocating for protecting their own retirement funds and demanding a say. And he was like, why don't they just stop? Don't they know we know best? Okay, why don't they just, like, he literally described a situation in which all these people should just stop causing trouble, and he and his colleagues and friends who know best should, just run things. And other people around him were not saying that's insane, that's tyrannical, you're a Nazi. They were like, yeah, obviously we know best. And I've heard versions of that conversation in other elite circles, and he does not think, he thinks he's a really nice guy, and he is a nice guy. He just literally is blind to the fact that that outcome depends on suppressing the rights and freedoms of all people. So what I think is happening is that at the Davos WF World Bank level, they're they've been having presentations for a number of years about global instability to come due to climate change, due to food shortages, due to overpopulation, scarce resources, and obviously the climate crisis escalating with large free populations. So there's kind of a determination that an authoritarian set of governments can manage that better than free people. And that, of course, justifies anything, as you know. But that's just, I think, that's just a kind of theory based on the presentations of the last few years. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's borne out too by the alignment of left and right. Certainly in UK politics, we now have, you couldn't put a wafer thin mint between the Labour policy and Conservative policy. It's encouraging that just today the Liberal Democrats in the UK, Sir Ed Davey, announced in the House of Commons that he was going to oppose the extension of the Coronavirus Act, which is at last, we're getting some opposition emerging. But it does appear that both left and right are quite happy to reach this consensus.
Right.
In other words, let's dispense with democracy.
Right.
It's shocking. The process of opposition.
I'm so worried. I just want to kind of finish out the who's doing this, because it goes right to that. Like in Britain, you literally have no alternatives until what you just said to me, because they're both saying fine, lockdowns forever, and you don't have freedom of assembly. You're locked down in your homes. Your kids are being horribly treated at school. It's so appalling, and literally no one is standing up. I mean, I interviewed a member of the House of Lords, and she was assailed, and I was assailed for even kind of going there, that the British people had rights. So they're in addition to the kind of theory behind justifying authoritarianism at the kind of Davos level as a kind of way to save humanity, there are bad actors really exploiting this situation. And that explains why in your country and in mine, people like, and in Canada, people like, Justin Trudeau, Gavin Newsom, Andrew Cuomo are like engaging in acts that, to me as a political consultant, make no sense, because they're burning up political capital. That only means they've been paid off by other people. And that's what we're seeing at the highest levels. So who are some of the people intervening in our processes? China, who is not our friend and who wants to be the global power by 2025, per their own white papers, have a number of thoughtful people in the intelligence world and this sort of statecraft world have been documenting this. They've been paying for, buying up, influencers, sports teams, newspapers, corporations, that own news platforms in the West. So that's one thing. And they've been funneling money to campaigns of elected officials, especially Democrats. And I'm a Democrat. So that's an unseen kind of treasonous action that you're not going to see the fingerprints of for the most part, but it can result in, Gavin Newsom's, I'm just going to extend the lockdowns, extraordinary. I'm not saying I know that he's funded by Chinese money, but there's so much Chinese money flowing into the coffers
Yeah.
of influencers. And the other thing that is related but much more immediate, and you and I are from the tech world and the comms world, is big tech exploiting this. And Bill Gates's money, I've been reading his 990s. Anyone can check this. Millions and millions and millions of dollars flowing to BBC, Telegraph, Guardian, New York Times, NPR, but also to K through 12 education, to community groups for vaccine information, for COVID education. There's something called the COVID-19 Response Project, which is big tech. It was, put together in March, long before anyone knew of last year how long this pandemic would be. Amazon, NASDAQ, Nintendo, Zoom, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all these big tech companies and companies that profit from lockdowns gathered together to communicate a message about lockdowns. And I'm almost done. But so all of these people's profits are up 24 billion to 3-digit billions since the pandemic began. They don't want lockdowns to stop. And Bill Gates is invested in vaccines. He doesn't want a person to not be vaccinated. So those are the 6 to 10 oligarchs who just don't want us to have our liberties back.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a rumor doing the rounds today on Twitter that Boris Johnson was overheard in the House of Commons saying yesterday that the vaccine was the result of capitalism and greed. He obviously doesn't understand the meaning of the word capitalism. He seems to be destroying an awful lot of entrepreneurs and capitalist endeavors here. And he seems to be mixing up capitalism with corporatism. And it's really quite astonishing that a conservative prime minister can be behaving in this way. Naomi,
can I
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to speak to that because that's like the last piece of this puzzle. You see the same policies in Canada, in Australia, in the United States, in Britain, in the Republic of Ireland, to kill high streets, or what we call main streets, and to kill pubs and restaurants, even though there is no science that says that there's any reason to keep them closed epidemiologically, and to kill small business and small landlords, right? Like we just came out of 6 months of forbidding landlords from collecting rent. And I'm a small landlord, and I know that that means that big developers will sweep up those properties in a fire sale. But you're also seeing 110,000 restaurants driven out of business in the United States, similar horrible outcomes for high streets in Britain. So what is this? It's a massive transfer of wealth. It kills off the competition of Amazon. It kills off the competition of your equivalent of Walmart. And it allows, who are the people who can stage an effective rebellion, peaceful rebellion, to get back freedom? Only the small business owners of Britain and America, only the middle class. So basically this creates what the oligarchs have called a K-shaped recovery, where all the money, all the competition has already been transferred to those 6 to 10 oligarchs, and everyone else is kind of in a feudal state, desperate to work at Walmart.
Yeah, and indeed, and of course, there's going to be a fire sale of these businesses, probably to vulture capitalists.
Exactly,
it's probably happening as we speak, and it's incredibly depressing. My final question for you, Naomi: how do we get out of this unholy mess? Is it people power? Is it civil disobedience? What is it?
So, what can we do? We have the Second Amendment, and I am a peaceful person, but it is harder to do this to an armed citizenry. And I hate guns, but I really see the advantage of a Second Amendment, because basically Britain has no recourse right now except other forms of civil disobedience. I think in Britain, there has to be massive civil disobedience. People have to ignore lockdown rules. Something really interesting is that often you're told things are rules and they don't have the force of law. It's just Boris Johnson saying they're rules. But if you look at the law, there's no enforcement authority. So I would tell people, go visit your loved ones, take the masks off your children's school by the thousands, go peacefully protest. I would warn people to ignore violent infiltrators who are definitely going to be creating really unpleasant, violent scenes in peaceful protest, because there's, history shows there's a.
Yeah, we saw that in
Yeah,
Bristol really at the weekend.
totally. That you're listening
After what was an incredible protest in London and other UK cities and US cities on Saturday.
Yeah. So my guidance for peaceful protest is don't march, sit down. So an instigator, can't instigate. Don't chant, sing. Like, I've studied protests that work over, in closing democracies, and marching, chanting protests can be easily infiltrated. Sitting, singing protests cannot. So that's really important. Dress beautifully so that you can't be kind of tarred in the media by, people in black hoodies and face masks doing violent things. The civil rights movement is a great model for that. But it has to be law. The other really important thing is information. So what I really worry about is, in Britain, you guys are in a complete propaganda bubble. And as you said, the BBC is just pushing more and more and more propaganda, and major news outlets are bought up. The Irish Times is bought up, which is, I don't know that for a fact, but it seems to be kind of part of that consortium. It's very important for people to start using printed paper and books and gathering in, living rooms to communicate, because those are unhackable. And also, you guys should be, getting international communications from Germany and from America, because there are anti-lockdown movements all over the world, and transferring those, the critiques of the science, the critiques of the nonsense, the peer-reviewed studies that challenge the science, distributing those on paper to people. We have to go back to the technologies of human beings that worked to bring down the Soviet Empire, which is, paper, books passed from hand to hand, and, people assembling and engaging in civil disobedience. And lastly, lawsuits and support for third parties that stand up and say, we're going to reclaim British liberties. The last thing I'm going to say is British people have to tell each other what their rights are. Right now, British people literally don't know what their rights are. They don't know that even now the European Court of Human Rights, I believe, guarantees freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, even though you're not part of Europe anymore in the same way. So I would check on that, but you need to tap thoughtful, liberty-minded lawyers, human rights lawyers, to advise you, what your rights are, so that everybody knows, and literally print those out on paper and pass them out to people to hold in their wallets in case they're stopped, in case they're charged, in case, in case they're taken to prison. And it on a happier note, history shows that these people cannot support or suppress a population of millions when millions stand up peacefully to reclaim their rights.
Absolutely. Well, Naomi, this is all brilliant advice. And listen, I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much indeed for joining me today. And best of luck with Daily Clout and these interviews, which I've watched many of them on Twitter. And thanks so much for being such a supporter of liberty and freedom.
And thank you so much. I hope we will all celebrate together in a pub in Northern Ireland very soon.
Yeah, pint of Guinness in an Irish pub soon, Naomi.
Yeah, I hope so. Take care. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.